Recording in
There will
progress.
now be an opportunity for silent prayer or meditation. Thank you, honorable members. Honorable members, before we proceed, I would like to remind you that the virtual mini plenary is deemed to be in the precincts of Parliament and thus constitute a meeting of the National Assembly for debating purposes only. In addition to the rules of virtual sittings, the rules of the National Assembly, including the rules of debate, will apply. Members enjoy the same powers and privileges that apply in a sitting of the National Assembly. Members should equally note that anything that is being said on the platform is deemed to have been said in the House and may be ruled upon. All members who have logged in shall be considered to be present and are requested to mute their microphones and only unmute it when requested to speak. The microphones are very sensitive and will pick up noise, which may disturb the attention of other members. When recognized to speak, please unmute your microphone and connect your video. Members may make use of the icons on the bar at the bottom of their screens, which has the option to allow a member to put up his or her hand to raise a point of order. The Secretariat will assist in this regard. And when using the virtual system, members are urged to refrain or desist from unnecessary points of order or interjections. We shall now proceed to the order, which is debate on vote number 32, Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment Appropriation Bill. I now recognize the Honourable Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. The Honourable Minister.
Honourable House Chair, our Deputy Minister, Ms. Makotso Satyu, Honourable Chairperson, Ms. Faith Mutambi, and all committee members, chairpersons of the entities reporting to our department, our Director General, Ms. Nomfundo Chabalala, CEs of our public entities, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. On the night of the 14th of April, Mrs. Tembisa Nomlala, an Enviro champ from the Quarry Road West informal settlement in the city of eThekwini, stood chest deep in water, clutching her little grandchild as she worked to evacuate her fellow residents. Using information from the satellite-linked flood early warning system, she and fellow Enviro champs were able to save all but one life as the Palmet River washed away 450 homes in her community. Her traumatic experience on that awful night illustrates the human tragedy behind the 6th International Panel on Climate Change report. This three-part document confirms climate change-induced disasters as the most significant threat to people's economies and the natural world. The suffering of the residents of Quarry Road West informal settlement illustrate the often quoted reality that women and children in particular living in conditions of poverty are most vulnerable to climate change. But Mrs. Nomlala and her fellow Enviro champs, who belong to the transformative riverine management program, have an important and powerful message for us. Vulnerable communities do not have to be totally powerless in the face of climate change. Instead, partnerships such as this one, which includes the city of eThekwini, the community of Quarry Road West, and the University of KwaZulu-Natal, can play an important role in building climate resilience within vulnerable communities. As we face the urgency of the climate crisis, climate resilience will need to be built across the system, and special attention will need to be paid to particularly vulnerable individuals, households, and communities. The current work by the Presidential Climate Commission to support the co-creation of a just transition framework for South Africa tells us that everyone affected must be part of developing solutions. There must be an equitable distribution of risks and opportunities so that vulnerable workers and communities do not carry the burden. And the process can only succeed if it helps us with our broader developmental objectives, namely economic inclusion, employment, and building a more equitable society. While we wait for this esteemed House to consider the climate bill, we are putting in place the domestic architecture for climate change mitigation and adaptation. In line with our revised nationally determined contribution to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we have developed the sectoral emission target framework that outlines emission reduction goals for key sectors of the economy. The process of allocating these targets will start in this financial year. 2 years ago, Cabinet approved the National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy. Thus far, we have supported all 44 district municipalities to develop climate change adaptation strategies. Current work includes support to ensure integration of climate priorities into integrated development plans. A presidential climate finance task team headed by Mr. Daniel Manele is leading a technical team to understand the full details of an offer by developed countries to mobilize $8.5 billion over the next 3 to 5 years to support the implementation of our revised NDC and our Just Transition Framework. Honourable members, recent media coverage has cast doubt on the Weather Service's ability to predict severe weather events and protect our citizens from the impact of climate change. These reports are untrue. Weather warnings were issued ahead of the floods from the 11th to the 12th of April and were updated with the intensity of the weather event. To ensure that despite revenue shortfalls, our forecasting ability is state-of-the-art, we have allocated the South African Weather Service an amount of 100 million rand over 3 years to upgrade its infrastructure, starting with 15 million in the last financial year. As you are aware, we continue to face severe air pollution in the 3 highly industrialized priority areas of Vaal Triangle, Highveld, and Waterberg-Bojanala areas. The regulations for implementing and enforcing priority air quality management plans will be published by the end of this year. There are presently 10 appeals against the various decisions by the Department's National Air Quality Officer in relation to requests for the suspension and postponement of compliance with the minimum emission standards and the issuing of provisional atmospheric emission licenses. While some appeals were granted, others were refused. Due to the complex and conflicting nature of the issues raised in the appeals, I am putting in place a process in terms of Section 3A of the National Environment Management Act to advise me on the appeals. I have already gazetted invitations for nominations for a panel of experts to consider both oral and written evidence on these critical matters. Honourable members, a year ago, I released the high-level panel report, which reviewed policies, legislation, and practices related to the management, breeding, hunting, trade, and handling of elephant, lion, leopard, and rhino. In June 2021, the department released a draft policy position for public comment, which covered some of the panel's key recommendations. The public comment process solicited over 9,000 comments from widely divergent views. Accordingly, the department decided to proceed with the development of a white paper on the conservation and sustainable use of South Africa's biodiversity. The white paper will be considered by Cabinet in June, whereafter it will be published for public comment. But we don't have to wait for the white paper to formalize new approaches and practices in line with the panel's recommendations. Certain measures can proceed now on a mutually agreed basis. On the issue of the captive lion industry, I intend to establish a panel of experts to formulate and oversee implementation of a voluntary exit strategy for those who wish to participate. I believe that by engaging and working with stakeholders, we can develop a voluntary strategy that can mitigate risks, including the effect on the local economy, job creation, and the welfare and well-being of the lions themselves. This panel will have clearly defined terms of reference and tight timelines so that effect can be given to the high-level panel recommendations and the decisions emanating from the 2018 Parliamentary Colloquium on Lions. South Africa also needs a species recovery plan for white rhino, which considers the poaching crisis and the potential we have to breed white rhino in controlled environments for conservation purposes in support of conserving rhino in extensive systems. I believe that such a plan can be developed in partnership with the private rhino owners. And having considered this matter, I have requested SANParks to lead the development of such a recovery plan as a key element of their work in this financial year. Parliament has approved an amendment to the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act, which will enable the development of legislation at national level relating to the well-being of wildlife. We are in the process of establishing a wildlife welfare forum that will promote biodiversity conservation and the ecologically sustainable, responsible, and humane use and management of wildlife. Honourable members, I'm pleased to announce today that we have settled 58 out of 66 land claims within protected areas that were identified for speedy resolution during the 8th People and Parks Conference held in Limpopo in 2018. My special appreciation goes to the Land Claims Commission and Minister Toko Dodiza for her leadership. Of great concern to me are the unresolved land claims in the Kruger National Park. I want to commend the board of SANParks and the management of Kruger for the new energy which is being displayed in meeting with traditional authorities to conclude the complex land claims in a more inclusive manner, which is of greater benefit to the communities involved. Isimangaliso Wetland Park and SANParks earlier this year hosted investor conferences to attract private sector investment in new and existing tourism opportunities. Both investment conferences come at a crucial time in our country's overall economic reconstruction and recovery plan, in which tourism recovery and growth features in the top 5 priorities, together with infrastructure investment and green economy initiatives. We look forward to the projects introduced to investors supporting accelerated job creation in rural areas bordering on our parks, where currently few opportunities for sustainable livelihoods exist. In an effort to create more work opportunities for local communities living adjacent to our protected areas and support small and medium enterprises, this year the department will invest more in the protection and conservation of natural resources. Through a partnership with SANParks, SANBI, and Isimangaliso, we will create 8,315 work opportunities through our natural resource management portfolio, aimed at managing invasive species, restoring degraded dryland areas, as well as rehabilitating degraded wetlands. Furthermore, we will create 2,646 more work opportunities in the protected areas through our Environmental Protection and Infrastructure Program, which will upgrade and refurbish infrastructure in protected areas and botanical gardens. Honourable members, keeping our country clean and ridding our environment of unwanted and unsightly waste remains an important part of our commitment to provide a healthy environment to all. We have in the past promulgated regulations on mandatory extended producer responsibility with the aim to lessen the burdens on landfills. The regulations for organic waste treatment and organic waste composting have also been published for implementation in order to divert waste away from landfills and create new industries. To improve waste management in municipalities, the department is assisting in the development of their integrated waste management plans and training on sustainable waste practices. The department is also providing 22 vehicles to 19 municipalities across the country with a total value of over 42 million. These vehicles include skip loader trucks, front-end loaders, compactor trucks, and other trucks required to transport waste within these areas. Through our provincial and municipal support initiative, the Municipal Cleaning and Greening Program undertaken in the past financial year addressed public education, littering in 36 communities across the country. In all, 3,000 work opportunities were created as we improved environmental health. Honourable House Chair, fishers are an important contributor to food security and local growth. In the past year, we have faced a number of challenges related to not only the allocation of fishing rights, but also in regard to the alleged effects of seismic blasting on ocean and fishing resources. All of these are being addressed head on. To ensure fishing cooperatives are more sustainable, our department is developing support programs in collaboration with the Department of Small Business Development and a number of local municipalities, which this year will focus on business acumen, financial management, and improvement in the value chain. We will further facilitate the purchasing of fishing equipment for cooperatives that are in need. The results of the 2021 FRAP process were published on the 28th of February. We are now dealing with appeals. We are appointing an independent appeals team to advise me as the appeals authority on the merits of each and every appeal in order to ensure the process is fair and is concluded on time. I therefore urge all potential appellants and interested and affected parties to lodge their appeals on or before the cutoff time of midnight 29 May 2022. The impact of ocean-based seismic surveys on our marine protected areas and on the fishing industry is a major issue in the public domain. These surveys have been undertaken along our coastline since the 1950s, and South Africa has contributed to the body of foundational science on the issue. To ensure mitigation measures protect both our ecosystems and our fishing resources, the department intends to develop a research program on seismic surveys and their impacts on our local waters. We will start this year by looking back to determine if there are observable impact in ocean areas where seismic surveys have already taken place over the last few years. Honourable members, addressing the poaching of our country's wildlife and plant species has been prioritised by government, with provinces and sectors hard hit by these crimes receiving extensive support from the department. Early in February, we reflected on the rhino poaching statistics, and while we acknowledged the steady decline in poaching in the Kruger National Park, we also noted that poaching has shifted across the country and KwaZulu-Natal has become a key target area. As a result of the alarming rate of poaching in that province, key departmental resources have been deployed to actively support Ezemvelo KZN Wildlife and the South African Police Services. This includes assistance in intelligence gathering and joint investigations, support to law enforcement officials and joint operations managers, including the Nerve Centre in Hluhluwe Umfolozi Park, which is part of the integrated wildlife zones. With regard to the work being done by the Priority Committee under Initiative 5 of Operation Pakisa, a key concern remains the high demand and high prices paid for abalone. A similar concern is the continued illegal removal of West Coast rock lobster from our oceans. Thus, the department continues to focus its enforcement efforts on countering these illegal activities. In order to refocus our effort around the management of the abalone resource and how best to prevent and combat the illicit trade, the department, together with a broad range of stakeholders, will be developing an inclusive and holistic strategic response and action plan for the prevention and combating of trade in illegally harvested abalone. Honourable House Chair, let me conclude by thanking our Deputy Minister, Ms. Makotso Sotyu, for her energy and support in all areas of our department's work. My sincere thanks go to our Director General, Ms. Nomfundo Chabalala, for her consistent and thorough management of the many complex and varied tasks she leads. I express my profound thanks to the team Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, as well as the board chairpersons and CEOs and managers of our entities for all their dedication to environmental matters and sustainable use of our country's natural resources. Last but not least, my thanks go to our Portfolio Committee, led by the indomitable Honourable Faith Mutambi, who always keeps us on our toes. I thank you.
Well, thank you, Honourable Minister. The next speaker is the Honourable Faith Mutambi.
Thank you, House Chairperson, and greetings to you. Honourable Minister Chrissy, Deputy Minister Sochu, Honourable colleagues from the Portfolio Committee and fellow colleagues, honourable members, the environmental sector family, ladies and gentlemen. May I take this moment to extend to all of you, on behalf of the Portfolio Committee on Environment, Forestry and Fisheries, a warm welcome to this annual debate of the budget vote of the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environmental Affairs. House Chairperson, I would like to start this debate by thanking all the members of my Portfolio Committee for their unwavering commitment to protect our environment for the sake of both current and future generations of South Africans. Also to appreciate the support that your office had always given to us. The integrity of our fellow committee members, their diligence and intellectual vigor, and the frankness with which they participated in the discussions on this budget and associated annual performance plans of the department and the entities are truly phenomenal and have led to this budget debate today. Despite having not worked together with them from the very start of this 6th parliamentary cycle, this being my first budget debate in this Portfolio Committee on Environment, Forestry and Fisheries, I must report to you, House Chair, that we've worked exceptionally well as a committee, also supported by the department in the short time that we have been there. One has got no reservation in one's mind that whatsoever that we will continue working together, irrespective of our political affiliation, and emerge as one in the quest of protecting our environment. We might not always agree on certain details of how certain things have to be done, such as passing of this budget at the committee level, but there is much scope for us to agree on strategic issues pertaining to the environment, because environmental sustainability benefits us all, and environmental degradation, be it on our land, at sea, or in the atmosphere, costs us all, despite of our political affiliation. You will all agree with me that the recent catastrophic floods in the KZN, widely considered as a climate-induced, touch all of us as South Africans. You could not possibly see those pictures and the devastation without a deep sense of pain and compassion arising from within you. House Chairperson, the critical role that this broader environmental portfolio comprising fisheries and forestry plays in our lives is contained in Section 24 of our Constitution, which obliged us all in civil society and government to secure ecologically sustainable development. The Constitution set in motion a range of policies and procedures to overthrow improper assumptions that resources such as plant and animal products and air quality, amongst others, will always be available no matter how we live, produce, and consume them. Similarly, we have viewed our rivers, seas, land, and air as unending sinks for increasing amounts of solid, liquid, or airborne waste, despite the fact that the increasing degradation of our natural resources clearly indicates these things can no longer cope. In short, dear colleagues, we must protect and in certain cases improve the quality of our environmental resources to continue sustaining us both directly. For example, we need clean air to be alive and fishery for food, And indirectly, we need our biodiversity to support our tourism and our hospitality industry that provides us with employment to contribute towards to our poverty alleviation efforts. Despite this constitutional imperative, dear colleagues, for sustainable development and creative body of legislation to achieve this, our country's broader environmental sector, encompassing forestry and fishery resources, continue to be subjected to sustained pressures in the face of diminishing environmental assets relative to growing competing demands. Global warming and climate variability, loss of biodiversity, desertification-led and invasive alien species related to land degradation, waste pollution and littering, population growth, urbanization and air pollution are serious environmental and resource stressors that need focused and increased resource commitment. These problems present a challenge to our government beyond the jurisdiction of the department. For example, if you look at the budget allocation for the department in the 2022-2023 financial year, it's 0.1% of the overall government expenditure of 2.16 trillion, down from 0.43 of 2.2 trillion in 2021. The inflation figures from South African Reserve Bank shows that the level of funding for the department has been consistent since 2016-17, with no significant upward deviation, ranging between 0.40 and 0.45 of the national expenditure. The seemingly stable trend in the budgeted expenditure of the department is merely based on nominal allocation without giving due consideration to inflation. Furthermore, the transfer of the Forestry and Fisheries branches program of the former Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries to the department, effectively from the 1st of April 2020, as part of the National Micro-Organization of Government, has not improved the overall budget or outlook of the department in a significant manner. When we look at the department's level of responsibility for ocean governance and protection services over South Africa's very large exclusive economic zone, with an extent of about 1.5 million square kilometers, more than land surface of the country in the light of the current budget, one wonders whether the department is properly equipped to execute this noble task on our behalf as a country, let alone securing the integrity of our recently declared marine protected areas. House Chairperson, I know that Parliament has got the power of the purse, and hence we have the ability to amend budget, which are tabled here in Parliament. However, such an approach will not be sustainable in the long run. What is more sustainable is the proper appraisal of the broader environmental sector by those in our budget committees to make such relevant and appropriate decisions on funding of this crucial sector. However, having interacted with you, Honorable Minister, and your team during the processing of this budget vote 32, we are satisfied that the department is in capable hands, considering the caliber of the executive management and technical personnel under your executive leadership and authority, and also your assurance to the members of the committee that the department was working towards the attainment of a clean audit. We also recognize that the department fulfills its mandate mainly through policy making on matters of forestry, fisheries and environment, and also through coordination and the monitoring of the implementation of the national environmental policies, programs and legislation with additional support from its 5 entities, namely the Isimangaliso Wetland Park Authority, the South African National Biodiversity Institute, South African National Parks, the South African Weather Services, and the Marine Living Resource Fund. We considered and appreciated the purposeful structuring of the department into 9 programs to ensure for the effective achievement of its constitutional mandate. It is easy to see that the 9 different programs and their purposes are reflective of the different focus area and subsectors of environment management, which is truly commendable in the light of ongoing challenges that face all the different aspects of this sector. House Chairperson, our forestry, fisheries, and environment are key to our survival. whichever what we look at. For example, the way in which we respond to the threats of climate change will influence whether we can continue to export our agricultural produce to our traditional markets up north without being subjected to a carbon border tax adjustment. Similarly, the way how we manage our biodiversity and maintain our status as an iconic biodiversity conservation destination country will define whether we continue to receive increasing numbers of international tourists or not. Then we are so linked to with the other parts of the world that we conserve our natural resources, not just for ourselves, but for everybody. The environment does more than just providing raw materials for economic production or serving as a sink for pollutants that derive from the various facets of our economic activity. It is in this regard, House Chairperson, that we argue that the contribution of the environment must be holistically evaluated in deciding the levels of funding for the invaluable sector, considering the supportive nature of this sector to other economically viable sectors and also the positive impact that the environment has on our well-being or health, which is stated in Section 24 of our Constitution. House Chairperson, having considered the budget and the annual performance plan of the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and Environment, one wants to conclude one speech by rising on behalf of the African National Congress and hopefully on behalf of my very own committee to support this budget vote 32 allocation for 2022-23 financial year with the allocation of 8.947 billion as tabled on 23 February 2022. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Bryant.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. 6 months ago, the world met in Glasgow, Scotland, for the 26th United Nations Congress of the Parties on Climate Change. The Congress was held as a weary and battered international community started to slowly emerge from the global COVID-19 crisis. Many important commitments were made at the Congress, and none more important for South Africa than the $8.5 billion pledge by the US, UK, French, and German governments to help South Africa to transition away from coal-based power towards cleaner forms of energy. 6 months since this pledge was made, we're facing a new global crisis, following on from the vicious and unprovoked Russian attacks on Ukraine. This unjust assault on a sovereign nation has directly impacted the price of energy across the world and has accelerated a global scramble for additional renewable energy resources. South Africa had 6 months to process the $8.5 billion offer and should be way ahead of the pack, or so one would assume. Unfortunately, this is not the case. Our portfolio committee recently heard that 6 months later, government is, quote, still analysing the details of the pledge and is waiting on guidance from Cabinet as to whether or not to even accept the assistance. It's worth being reminded that South Africa remains the world's 12th highest emitter of greenhouse gases, at least 40% of which is produced by old coal-fired power stations. This generous and altruistic offer of assistance will help to fast-track our just transition towards a greener and more sustainable future. But it appears that while some ministers seem to grasp the challenges we're facing, there are others who are stuck in the Jurassic period, refusing to accept help or to acknowledge the growing international backlash against coal-based energy. Last month, over 400 people were killed by the unprecedented floods in Durban. The rainfall appears to have been between 4 and 8% more intense than normal, and this has been attributed directly to climate change by leading climate scientists from the University of Cape Town. These extreme weather fluctuations are being felt across the globe, but their impact will be all the more catastrophic for the developing world. Severe drought events are also increasing across South Africa, even though they may not be attracting the same levels of attention that Cape Town did in 2018 during its drought crisis. Municipalities like Gettling-Rivier in the Northwest Province, which has been facing a day zero scenario for the past 5 years with ongoing water shortages as a result of poor planning by the local ANC-controlled government. The impacts of increasing weather fluctuations caused by climate change will only serve to increase the social volatility in these already desperate municipalities. It's now glaringly evident that climate change is not something that will happen to our kids and grandkids alone. As evidenced by the severity of the recent floods and droughts, climate change is happening right now. It's vital that we prioritise the climate change bill, which is now before Parliament, and ensure that we're able to build climate change resilience through both mitigation and adaptation strategies into integrated government plans going forward. A key challenge identified during the Durban floods was the functioning of the early warning systems of the South African Weather Service. Representatives from SAWS have admitted recently in media reports that their stations are unstable and function intermittently due to ongoing poor maintenance. We've heard from SAWS that some warnings were issued prior to the Durban flood, but it appears that these may not have been properly communicated to all parties. Either way, how can we have confidence in the ability of SAWS to predict large-scale weather events if, as reported, their stations keep breaking down? A significant amount of budget has now been allocated for capital projects within SAWS in the coming year, but it's essential that the maintenance of existing stations is urgently prioritized. All indications are that DFFE is heading for another qualified audit opinion. The department's not improved the overall quality of performance reporting and incurred R1 billion of irregular expenditure. The department continues to both overpay and at the same time fail to make payments across the board. While we appreciate that the irregular expenditure has been reported for investigation, we'd again call for more effective consequence management. The people of South Africa simply deserve better, and officials who perform their duties negligently, fraudulently, or maliciously must be held to account. Rhino numbers in the Sandparks managed Kruger Park have decreased by 75% over the past 10 years under this administration, and officials have admitted that these numbers will likely continue to drop. The cruel illusion of lower poaching numbers is likely only due to the fact that there are so few rhinos left to poach in the park. The vast majority of illegally trafficked horn is going to China, and it's high time that this government increases the pressure on the Chinese government to compel them to do their bit to combat the flow of horn into their country. Sandparks continues to stockpile masses of trimmed horn in secret caches across the country, and we need to know what the future of these stockpiles are and whether the stock is being pilfered. Chair, it's important to make special mention of our brave Sandparks Rangers who put their lives on the line every day and form the thin green line in the battle against poaching. Unfortunately, these anti-poaching teams in Kruger will continue to be on the back foot, while 87 ranger posts remain unfilled. Surrounding rural communities are desperate for jobs, and the ongoing vacancies are simply unacceptable. Sandparks senior management have admitted that they're overstretched and don't have the resources at their disposal to properly protect their animals. The financial hardship and low morale amongst rangers has sadly led to some staff being lured into working with poaching syndicates, and recent investigations have exposed sophisticated criminal networks operating within Sandparks. The DA continues to call for the proper implementation of polygraph testing for Sandparks staff to disincentivize rangers from working with poachers. The CEO of Sandparks remains suspended on full pay while his internal disciplinary drags on, and this must be resolved as a matter of urgency in the interest of all parties involved. Many landfill sites across the country remain in terrible condition, with at least 4 illegal landfills currently being investigated by the department. And there's an urgent need to prioritize both the approval of new landfills and the maintenance and improvement of existing landfills across the country. Government must do better in decreasing the amounts of waste going into landfill by promoting and facilitating separation at source projects. It's not right that the private sector continues to import large amounts of plastic waste from SADC countries to fill their recycling plants, while we contribute a comparatively small amount. Plastic waste clogs up our landfills, it ends up in oceans and wetlands, and it's ingested by wildlife. Government should be aggressively rolling out recycling initiatives across the country, and it's high time that we follow the example of other African countries like Kenya and implement a complete ban on single-use plastic bags, instead of having to continue to conduct oversight and monitoring of the ineffective plastic bag tax, which was recently exposed to be dogged by 10 million rands in fraudulent activity. The fallout from the UPL fire that followed on from the riots last year has resulted in the complete devastation of the Umhlanga Lagoon and surrounds. The majority of indigenous wildlife have been killed, and it will take many years before any sort of rehabilitation is possible. The response from the local municipality was unfortunately woefully inadequate, and we simply cannot allow for this to happen again. It's heartening to hear that an action plan has now been developed to deal with land invasions in forestry plantations, and this has been identified as a significant barrier to improving the forestry sector. Again, it appears that there's a lack of agreement in Cabinet as to who should bear the responsibility to address certain land invasions in plantations, specifically in Grabouw in the Western Cape. While many South Africans struggle with employment and rising inflation, 33 posts have been removed from the forestry branch, which will make the rollout of the forestry master plan more difficult. The forestry sector has the potential to create many new jobs, yet the department appears to have done away with their ambitious job targets, which appear to show that the potential growth in the sector is still a long way away. There remains a target to plant 120,000 trees for the coming year, which appears to be setting the department up for failure, and they were only able to plant 40,000 trees in the previous years. How they'll now plant 3 times this with limited staff has yet to be seen. The department has shrunk the budget for marine protected areas and reduced the budget of the monitoring, control and surveillance sub-program. This will inevitably affect enforcement operations, and it appears that the department is effectively giving up on the fight against poaching of crayfish and abalone, while coastal communities continue to be racked by the impacts of criminal gangs and drugs associated with poaching. The results of the long-awaited fishing rights allocation process have unfortunately left many traditional fisherfolk without any income and no exemptions to continue to fish while their appeals are being heard. We sincerely hope that the Minister will take their appeals seriously at the end of this month and not leave more families destitute in these increasingly desperate economic times. Of all the directorates, biodiversity and conservation is getting the worst deal. This was supposed to be a priority area and was originally mentioned as such by the President during his honeymoon phase, yet it seems the tune has now changed. We've seen the budget for biodiversity and conservation being reduced by 14% in 21-22, and now a whopping 58.4% reduction for 22-23. This is a massive blow for our fragile ecosystems. Finally, the dithering over the future of the Esimvelo estuary mouth brought many local farmers to the brink of destitution and led to land invasions earlier in the year into the surrounding park. Government was only saved by the natural breaching of the mouth, which was caused by the unprecedented flooding in April. The DA welcomes the steps taken to finalize and publish the white paper on conservation and sustainable use of biological resources, emanating from the high-level report on the management of lion, elephant, leopard, and rhino. The implementation of the report has been long outstanding and has caused anxiety and uncertainty for many, and it's good to see that steps are now being taken to address this. We would also like to commend the Minister on her conciliatory approach to dealing with issues that involve communities, particularly regarding outstanding land claims, and the steps taken to include the welfare and well-being of wildlife must also be commended. While some steps have been taken in the right direction, the weight of the challenges faced within DFFE and its entities are manifold. Real progress will only start to happen when there's a willingness to address the core issues within many of the directorates and an agreement within the Cabinet on key issues such as climate change, conservation, and biodiversity. We do not have the luxury of time anymore, and decisive, courageous, and urgent steps must now be taken by government to pull our environment back from the brink. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Paulson.
Thank you, Chairperson. The EFF rejects Budget Vote 32 on Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. Section 2J of the Marine Living Resources Act states, and I quote, "The need to restructure the fishing industry to address the historical imbalances and to achieve equity in all branches of the fishing industry." Furthermore, Section 18.5 of the MLRA states, "In granting any right referred to in subsection 1, the Minister shall, in order to achieve the objectives contemplated in Section 2, have particular regard to the need to permit new entrants, particularly those from the historically disadvantaged sectors of society." Chairperson, these two sections are the cornerstones for the transformation of the fishing industry and enable the Minister to introduce new entrants into the various fishing sectors. But yet, Chairperson, existing rights holders for most of the basket of species in FRAP 2022 were the usual suspects, I&J, Sea Harvest and Oceana. For the three of the top high-value species, Hake Deep Sea, Squid and South Coast Rock Lobster, there were 8 successful new entrants out of thousands that submitted applications. Many fishers registered companies and made application for FRAP 2022, and very, very few of them had any success. Fishing is being deliberately moved away from the traditional coastal communities to service the high-end market. There was a time when most fish were caught by coastal fishing communities, where it was not just a livelihood, but also a form of socialization for those communities. Traditional fishers used to donate excess fish to orphanages and old age homes. Under the current government, fishing is now being fully commercialized breaking down the social bonds that traditional fishing communities once had, and stripping these communities of their livelihoods. Fishing used to bind our communities together. Coastal fishing communities are not high-income communities. They had no desire to take more than is needed. Species such as crayfish, abalone, and Hottentot or Cape bream used to be poor man's fish, but due to its popularity among the poor working class, commercial fishing companies in collusion with government quickly seized the opportunity. This ANC government and all its ministers responsible for fishing have prioritized commercial interest and robbed coastal fishing communities of their livelihoods. In addition to the species allocated, the department also allows fishing companies large bycatches which could otherwise sustain the small-scale fishing industry. For example, Hague deep-sea trawlers would also catch snook that could otherwise sustain all small-scale fishers for 2 to 3 years. The Fisheries Management branch has never delivered services timelessly due to human capacity shortages. FRAP 2020 became FRAP 2022, not FRAP 2021. And this is due to the staff shortages, and the departmental plan shows there will be a further 36 posts reduced from the already understaffed branch. The courts had to instruct the department to create access for small-scale fishers that was sidelined by the MLRA because it was so focused on commercial fishers. But we know that it was not only the ANC that sold out small-scale fishers, but it is a fact that COSATU was involved in drafting the MLRA. The ANC and its alliance partners COSATU are responsible for the poverty, unemployment and inequality small-scale fishers are suffering. Since 2012, when the small-scale fishers policy was approved, commercial fishers were allocated fishing rights 3 times, 2013, 2015 and 2022, while small-scale fishers are still waiting for the first fishing right allocation to be concluded. The same injustices exist in forestry, where smaller growers and forestry communities were not even considered when the National Forestry Act was crafted. Chairperson, through the Working on Fire program, we are able to create employment for many more young people, but because this government does not have capacity, contractors are taking the bulk of the money through the outsourced EPWP programs. Chairperson, when it comes to waste speakers, they are saving us money at a local government level by collecting and sorting waste. The money that these municipalities save should be invested in waste speakers. And lastly, Chairperson, I would like to address this department's approach to climate change. If we had a functional government, we would have had proper mitigation strategies in place that would have saved those more than 400 lives that were lost due to government's negligence in the recent floods on the East Coast. Chairperson, it's for these reasons that the EFF rejects this budget, just like the voters in Pokwani and Mahikeng overwhelmingly rejected the ANC in the recent by-elections in favor of the EFF. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Singh.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. Chairperson, time will not allow me to reflect on all the programs that this department is responsible for. However, let me start by saying, as the IFP, we once again extend our condolences to families who have lost loved ones during the devastating floods in KZN and other parts of the country. Our hearts also go out to those families who are still trying to locate loved ones buried in tons of debris. Finding these remains will certainly bring some sort of closure and be of some comfort to them. Chairperson, never has it been so imperative that we take drastic action as a country, a region, a continent, and as one humanity to mitigate the ever-encroaching disastrous effects of climate change. Terms such as deforestation, global warming, carbon capture and corridors, plastics pollution, the green economy and sustainable development must become the norm rather than the exception and forefront in our minds as we govern and holistically enact laws and regulations for the benefit of our present and future generations. Chairperson, we recently witnessed, as we heard, the devastation and tragedy caused by an extreme weather event, which has been directly attributed by scientists as a consequence and effect of climate change. Such devastation will take years to recover from, and is compounded by the fact that we remain in the midst of the current COVID-19 global health crisis. This is sadly contrasted with extreme water shortages in other parts of the province and country. For example, the residents in Bergville, situated along the mighty Tugela River, have no water in their taps, as the limited resources being directed to Johannesburg, to Minister Barbara Creasy and others. Chairperson, we are in a crisis. Climate change is real, and we are beginning to see the inconvenient truth that a hotter planet is a more extreme one, and that, if left unchecked, an unlivable one. According to the World Meteorological Organization, the year 2020 was one of the 3 warmest years recorded globally. Chairperson, what we need is a people-centric approach, together with the requisite enabling legislation and regulation, which will be central to us achieving success. It is imperative, therefore, that the long-due climate change bill, which is currently before the Portfolio Committee, be urgently passed. This bill cannot linger in Parliament. Additionally, it is crucial that all stakeholders be consulted and that the bill reflects strong enforcement measures. Above all, we need to ensure strong consequent management of these legislative tools. We cannot continue to draft and publish policies and legislation, but fail to properly enforce these measures. The IFP has repeatedly called for the establishment of specialist green courts to deal with environmental crime, as this remains the only feasible solution to dealing effectively with criminals and syndicates that target environmental resources like the rhinos. Turning to the next point, COP26 focused on climate change and deforestation, and good work was done. But this momentum must be continued now more than ever, despite the hardships and ongoing challenges we are having because of the impact of COVID-19. Public and private partnerships will be essential as we find suitable solutions together as a nation. Initiatives such as the 1 Billion Trees for Africa, which is a local community ecosystems restoration action, which seeks to grow indigenous trees and develop non-timber-based products value chain using integrated agroforestry practices, is an example of what should be happening at community and local government level. And it has to be assisted by business as well as provincial and national government. But in welcoming this initiative, Honorable Minister and Chairperson, one has to be very careful that we do not disrupt the lives of communities that rely on this land for agriculture and grazing purposes. And if one looks at the rest of Africa and maybe in our own country, there is conflict between communities and those that are trying to achieve carbon credits through planting, through deforestation. Chairperson, it also remains imperative that we place ourselves upon a net zero emissions trajectory and commence establishing sustainable and renewable green power sector initiatives, which will not only ensure power generation capacity to the ever-increasing demand for supply, but also reach our off-grid rural communities. Development and climate change ambitions must not be seen as a zero-sum game, where we can have only one or the other, but rather seen as the 2 necessary pillars of a sustainable and renewable future for South Africa. Chairperson, lastly, I can see you coming up to me now. The Paris Agreement highlighted a number of issues. We need to make sure that we can implement all these issues. And I want to say lastly, this department has an extremely important role to play in the bigger scheme of things. It needs more money, but for now, we will support this budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Singh. The next speaker is the Honorable Breed.
Thank you, Chairperson. 7 years ago, this department was apparently a high-performing organization. After its fall from grace, strides have been made to improve it and its audit outcomes, but we are not yet in the clear. Especially taking climate change and the recent KZN floods into account, more needs to be done by this department. Ek moet wel byvoeg dat ek hoop het vir hierdie departement met minister Creasy en haar span ons stuur daarvan. Die afgelope dieselbesoedeling in die Thabo Mofokeng en Fezile Dabi distrikte in die Vrystaat is 'n bewys van haar erns oor die omgewing en daadwerklike optrede om probleme aan te spreek. The budget allocation to the department is 0.41% of the overall government expenditure. It is down from 0.43% in 2021. Hierdie departement het 'n kwynende begroting en is kommerwekkend. Ja, hierdie is nie onderwys of gesondheid of selfs landbou nie, maar ons moet begin besef dat sonder die werk wat hierdie departement en sy entiteite vermag, gaan voedselsekuriteit al hoe verder uit ons bereik wees, ons almal se gesondheid in gedrang wees en voor ons oë uitvee, gaan skole en ons bestaan iets van die verlede wees. Consequently, the department received a budget allocation of 8.9 billion rand for the 2022-23 financial year, which indicates a nominal decrease of 1.67%, which translates to over 151 million rand for the 21-22 allocation. In nominal terms, 4 programs received an increased allocation. It is welcome that regulatory compliance and sector monitoring, as well as chemicals and waste management, have increased budgets, especially looking into the state of municipal landfill sites, as previously mentioned. Conversely, the reduction of funds affected 5 programs: Oceans and Coasts, Climate Change, Air Quality and Sustainable Development, Biodiversity and Conservation, Forestry Management, and Fisheries Management. Alhoewel die program wat verhoogde begrotings ontvang het belangrik is en 'n argument uitgemaak kan word dat hulle dit moet ontvang, kan ons nie na wat in KZN gebeur het, dieselfde kyk na die programme wat verlaagde begrotings ontvang het nie. Ons kan nog minder dit aanvaar in ag genome die geweldige skade wat aangerig is, die agterstand wat Suid-Afrika in terme van gereedheid vir rampe en voorbereiding teen klimaatsverandering het. Voorsitter, dit is verder net so belangrik om ons seelewe te bestuur en te bewaar, om ook te verseker dat sekere visspesies nie uitsterf as gevolg van oorvangs daarvan nie. Suid-Afrika kan nie bekostig om soos ander lande in Afrika, byvoorbeeld Tanzanië en Zanzibar, 'n bewaringskrisis te beleef as gevolg van oorvangs en die spandabelrige omgang van ons met ons omgewing nie. Ons kan ook wel nie bekostig om van ons riviere te vergeet nie. Die departement moet kennis neem van die hordes van funksionele rioolaanlegte in munisipaliteite wat lei tot rivierbesoedeling en dit moet geprioritiseer word. Although there is a budget increase to 5 of the entities and that is welcomed, it is worrying that one entity that has a decreased transfer is the South African Weather Service. As stated above, we cannot afford to not prioritize our knowledge of the changing weather patterns in and around South Africa. We need to prioritize our radar infrastructure for this. Volgens die kenners gaan die ooste van Suid-Afrika nog meer ekstreme weeromstandighede in die komende jare ervaar. Ons het gesien dat die Noord-Kaap van tuisterende multijaar droogtes na 'n muggiepplaag gaan. Muggiepplaag word slegs in die natste weeromstandighede soos in Skotland aangetref. Nelson Mandela Bay in die Oos-Kaap is 'n paar dae van dag 0 af, terwyl ander gedeeltes van dieselfde provinsie saam met KwaZulu weggespoel het. Ban Ki-moon, former Secretary General of the UN, once said, "Climate change is the single greatest threat to sustainable future, but at the same time, addressing the climate challenges presents a golden opportunity to promote prosperity, security, and a brighter future for all." Dit is verder net so kommerwekkend dat biodiversiteit en bewaringsbegroting aan die verklein is, veral aangesien stropery steeds 'n geweldige probleem is en aandag gaan moet geniet om die bewaring van ons groot vyf te verseker. Ook visserye bestuur wat self ongelooflike uitdagings in terme van ons seelewe, vissersregte ensovoorts ervaar, gaan in die toekoms ook moet aandag geniet. So kan ons verder na die program van lugkwaliteit en volhoubare ontwikkeling kyk en moet ons van die afgelope deadly air hofsaak van the Centre for Environmental Rights teen die departement onthou. Dit sal wys wees om die nodige befondsing daar te stel vir lugkwaliteit bestuur. But let me conclude, Chairperson. By polluting the oceans, not mitigating CO2 emissions, and destroying our biodiversity, we are killing our planet. And let's face it, there is no planet B. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Thring.
Honourable House Chairperson, the ACDP asserts that South Africa is a blessed nation. Together with our human resource, we are blessed with an abundance of mineral wealth. We have a coastland of some 2,800 kilometers, presided over by two great oceanic systems, the Mozambique Current on the one side of the continent and the Benguela on the other. This department is the custodian of South Africa's indigenous woodlands and plantation forest resources, which covers over 50 million hectares. What we must not allow is for a blessing to become a curse. The late world-renowned leader, Dr. Miles Monroe, taught that when God created the earth, the rain was held back because there was no one to manage it. He further eloquently stated that what we fail to manage, we will lose. The ACDP wishes to make it abundantly clear that if this department fails to implement fiscal discipline and cost effectiveness for the common good of all South African citizens and fails to manage our state resources effectively, we will suffer loss. The department is mandated to give effect to the right of citizens to an environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being, and to have the environment protected for the benefit of present and future generations. Even though the budget has been decreased by some 1.2 billion to 8.716 billion, this mandate must be respected and taken seriously. Accounting officers must be held accountable, and failed audits resulting in irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure should never be normalized. Where necessary, consequence management must follow. The ACDP welcomes the increased budget allocation for the regulatory compliance and sector monitoring, which is responsible for enforcement, compliance, and coordination. We must protect our oceans and coastlands and not allow them to become looting and toxic waste dumping grounds for foreign nations. We must preserve our forests, for in doing so, we protect our biodiversity. We must protect our air quality and not allow uncontrolled cloud seeding and weather control experiments over our skies. And neither should industries be allowed to spew their toxic waste into our rivers and oceans. We must remember, Chair, as I conclude, that we will lose what we fail to manage. And over the last 28 years over the ruling party, much has been lost. And now that needs to be regained. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Members, I will just amend the speakers list to allow the Honourable Holomisa to participate in this debate. The Honourable Holomisa.
Chairperson, thank you, Honourable Minister and Deputy Minister and Honourable Members. The UDM supports the budget. The recent devastating floods in KwaZulu-Natal and other provinces have been ascribed to climate change, a problem which South Africans have to date not taken seriously. Recently, the Presidential Climate Commission, on which I serve, held a conference at which the public expressed their views. We need to understand our national interests regarding the energy mix. Elsewhere, countries are using nuclear, coal, and renewable energy. South Africa cannot act in isolation, but must learn from other countries. Cabinet must come up clearly regarding our energy mix so that we can deal with the threat of Eskom's weaknesses, which is affecting our economy. While we talk about transition to renewable energy, we need to consider all factors. Littering and garbage dumping have unfortunately become an ugly pandemic. They festoon our living spaces, where cattle accidentally graze on them, and when it rains, they wash down the stormwater pipes, blocking them to great risk. I recently returned from a study tour to Kenya with colleagues from other parties. I was happy to learn that there are solutions to the scourge of plastic products are much more proactive, and that is they have long banned plastic bags and developed replacements for them. One does not see plastic bags littering the streets of Nairobi. Plastic water bottles are prohibited from their national parks. tools which we can consider. Spatial development is another important issue that needs collective responsibility. Our people do not understand the dangers of building their homes or sheds in the flood lines of the rivers and wetlands. Finally, local environment education needs to be ramped up, and timeless laws enforcement is critical to prevent disaster. Climate change is here to stay, and we should encourage our people to participate in the legislative processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Gancho.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Please allow me to do my speech with my video off because of connectivity. Honourable Chair, prior to the advent of democracy in our beloved country, the ANC in 1992 developed 6 guiding principles that spoke to equitable access to environmental resources, sustainable development, public participation in all planning decisions which affect the development and management of natural resources, public right to access to information and the courts on issues of environmental concern, integrated approach to environmental issues that relates to all sectors of society, and lastly, recognition of the integrated nature of the global environment and the need for international cooperation in policymaking. Honourable Chairperson, in support of this budget vote 32, I will make reference to these guiding principles to indicate that it is only the ANC that has developed progressive legislations on the environment, and this has benefited any South Africans, including some sectors of society hostile to the ANC transformative agenda. It is the ANC policy objective to develop a framework aimed at creating conditions conducive to sustainable development, and this requires a future growth strategy is compatible with ecological and human rights principles, and that growth be geared towards the provision of basic needs to benefit the whole community. On equitable access to environmental resources, South Africa has the longest coastline on the African continent, and this provides an opportunity for a substantial development of the fishing industry. One of the concerns is the removal of many traditional fishing communities from the access to these resources. The ANC sees the transformation and its restructuring of the fishing industry by dismantling large fishing conglomerates to smaller community-based fisheries. Please note that no one can deny that this is progressive. The ANC would like to promote the sector expanded participation in the entire value and supply chain linked to South Africa's oceans economy priorities. And we have, as the ANC noted, that fisheries sector has a great potential to create much needed job opportunities and livelihoods, especially for the poor and economically marginalized subsistence fishing communities. In this regard, the finalization of the fishing quotas is important to the ANC, including the development of a marine policy that ensures that the use of South African ships as part of our trade with the rest of the world. Honourable Chairperson, the intention to provide for the conservation of the marine ecosystem, the long-term sustainable utilization of marine living resources, and the orderly access of exploitation, utilization, and protection of certain living marine resources, and the exercise of control marine resources in a fair and equitable manner to the benefit of all citizens of South Africa is found in the Marine Living Resources Act. This vote with its limited resources allocation of about 8,947,900,000 rands, will transfer about 976,840,000 rands to the Marine Living Resource Fund, and this will create about 1,892 job opportunities created through Working for Fisheries program. The Economic Recovery and Restructuring Plan identifies aquaculture as one of the important strategic pillars of the country's oceans economy. In seeking to unleash the great potential, the vote will support through Operation Pakisa about 12 aquaculture catalyst projects and conduct 6 aquaculture research over the medium term, whilst acknowledging that more can and will be done. It is the aspiration expressed in 1955 Freedom Charter that guides the ANC desire to realize meaningful participation in all planning decisions which affect the development and management of the country's natural resources. In conclusion, Chairperson, I challenge this parliament to dream, and as they dream, I ask them to recite the following words from the founding father Umatiba when he says, "I dream of our vast deserts, of our forests, of our great wilderness, and we must never forget that it is our duty to protect this environment." I thank you, Honourable Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Members, as I invite the Honourable Deputy Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, I also invite the Honourable Jumat Peterson to preside over the remainder of this mini plenary. The Honourable Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I was just trying to get a suitable place where I can sit because we have already started with the load shedding this side. Thank you very much, Chairperson and Honourable Minister Barbara Christie, my Minister, Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee, Ms. Faith Mutambi, Honourable Members of Parliament and members of the Portfolio Committee, Management of the Department of Forest, Fisheries and Environment led by our DG, Ms. Nomfundo Chabalala, all the CEOs of the department's entities, ladies and gentlemen. Chairperson, I would like to take this opportunity today to thank all the first responders, community members, businesses, and NGOs who have come together in the spirit of Ubuntu and worked tirelessly to help the people of KwaZulu-Natal who were affected by the recent floods, as alluded to by Minister Barbara Christie. The extensive damage caused by the masses of water cemented our need to accept the reality of climate change and the critical importance of warnings of possible extreme weather events, which are expected to become more and more frequent as the climate continues to change. Early warnings by the South African Weather Service are important for communities and structures of government because this ensures that there is a liaison with disaster management authorities. This in turn ensures that public and disaster response units are mobilized on time and influence government action all the way down to the municipalities at an individual level. Chairperson, a key aspect of climate change is the reduction of greenhouse gas emission and a resulting improvement in our air quality. As we deal with the effect of climate change, the importance of equipping our country's early warnings and weather prediction systems and air quality monitoring stations is key. Weather forecasting and air quality monitoring are but two of the exciting environment-related sectors in which we can encourage youth following science-related study path to consider as future career choices. Honorable Chair, the second report published as part of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's sixth assessment pointed out that Africa is already experiencing widespread loss and damage as a result of human-induced climate change. We have seen the impact of COVID-19 on South African and global economy this past few years, especially job losses and impacts on households. Unemployment, poverty, inequality, and addressing gender-based violence remain our most pressing issues as we fight climate change. In addressing climate change, Chairperson, we must not forget the important role of women and youth, be it within communities or in leadership roles. In this instance, Honorable Chair, in February this year, I had an honor to be the guest speaker at a preparatory event organized by an NGO, Ilita Labantu, in partnership with the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, to flesh out women's needs and priorities going into the 63rd United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, which took place early in New York early in March. The UN meeting took place under the theme, Achieving Gender Equality and the Empowerment of All Women and Girls in the Context of Climate Change, Environmental Risk Reduction Policies and Programs. While South Africa continues to show global leadership in our inclusive approach to a just transition, the invaluable perspectives offered by women and youth on how to address climate change at the level of policy in both its development and implementation cannot be ignored. Women and girls are effective and powerful leaders and change makers for climate adaptation and mitigation action. They are involved in sustainability initiatives around the world and in their communities, while their leadership results in more effective climate action. It is therefore important that inclusive economic growth is key to addressing unemployment, gender equality, health, and other poverty-related issues. We are also promoting integration of gender issues in disaster resilience-related programs. This is over and above the national, provincial, and municipal disaster management centers, which primarily support the government's national climate change response policy to effectively manage inevitable climate impact. This is done through interventions that build and sustain South Africa's social, economic, and environmental resilience and emergency response capacity. Honorable Chairperson, maintaining intact ecosystems and species populations and ensuring connectivity across landscapes and seascapes is vital for preserving adaptive capacity of nature to climate change. This in turn will enhance human adaptive capacity and resilience. The importance of the role of health ecosystems and well-functioning ecological infrastructure in assisting us to adapt to climate change cannot be overemphasized. Chairperson, this is because healthy ecosystems are better able to cope with climate change impacts and in turn help people to adapt, while healthy ecological infrastructure like inland wetlands, estuaries, and coastal dunes are better able to protect, build infrastructure, and people from impact of extreme weather events. South Africa has already established itself as a leader in promoting nature-based responses, such as ecosystem-based adaptation and ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, as part of our national climate change response. Through the South African National Biodiversity Institute, we are committed to continuing these efforts. This includes our effort to mobilize international climate finance for ecosystem-based adaptation through a range of collaborations and multi-sectoral approaches. These are expected to unlock significant investment that deliver direct benefits to vulnerable and unlock the role the private sector and catalyst systems and policy responses that support South Africa's just transition to a climate resilient society, as I have repeated what the minister has just said. Honorable Chair, besides floods and other extreme weather events, drought is a new reality for many communities across our country. During the recent concluded United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD COP15 in Cote d'Ivoire, the Abidjan Declaration was adopted on achieving gender equality for successful land restoration. I participated as a panelist in the Gender Caucus to showcase our national efforts to respond to the UNDDC's Gender Action Plan and demonstrate the work being done to mainstream gender at all levels. The Abidjan Declaration recognizes that securing women's access to land, control over land, and access to finance for land-based economic activities are central components of women's economic empowerment and rights, and in generating opportunities for economic prosperity and independence. I must say, Chairperson, we need to congratulate our negotiators from South Africa, which were led by women, in order for us to be able to insert this clause in the Declaration of Abidjan. It was not an easy one. We are well aware that women are disproportionately affected by extreme weather events like droughts, as it threatens lives, livelihoods, and food security. South Africa is thus one of the countries that will implement projects and programs in response to SADC drought resilient strategy. You will agree with me that it is imperative that appropriate global attention and action to be focused on drought. South Africa therefore aligns with the strong message of Africa to COP15, which calls for the strengthening of policy frameworks and instruments to address drought under the convention. Honorable Chair, on the 9th of December 2002, the heads of states of South Africa, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe signed a treaty establishing the Great Limpopo Transfer-Tire Conservation Area. The core cross-border conservation area comprises of Limpopo National Park in Mozambique, the Kruger National Park in South Africa, and Gozarawa National Park in Zimbabwe. This year in April, I joined the Ministers of Environment from Mozambique and Zimbabwe to discuss various issues related to the collaboration management of this important cross-border conservation area. To mark the 20 years since the signing of this treaty, we agreed that it is fitting to celebrate this milestone with the continued bewildering and restoring of this globally important cross-border conservation landscape. It is through this partnership that keystone species are being reintroduced to new and existing conservation areas. To create a country free of litter and other waste in which we all recycle, upcycle, reuse, or repurpose materials requires a commitment by all citizens, as mentioned by other members who spoke before me. That is why the stakeholders' engagement sessions that are being held countrywide continue to be of importance in providing feedback on the progress we have made in implementing the district delivery model. As a district delivery model core champion, our ministry and department have spent time with the communities of provinces of Northwest and the Free State to discuss service delivery challenges that exist, particularly wage services, as well as localize the procurement and job creation that will promote and support local business and involve local communities. Besides building awareness about, for example, waste collection and landfill management, the department is also handing over waste collection compact trucks, front-end loaders, and other materials required by municipalities to improve service delivery across the 9 provinces. Thanks to Mr. Christie, who did this sterling job a week ago. Furthermore, through a number of interventions by the department, we hope to address challenges through the provision of the equipment necessary to compact waste at landfill sites, deliver waste to these sites, and to dispose waste in the correct way, as we are preparing to train our local councillors on how to manage the waste at their area. We hope then that through the project being implemented this year, will not only improve municipal waste management, but also see communities working together to clean their environment. Chairperson, the department is also spearheading the implementation of the Commercial Forestry Master Plan, which was approved by Cabinet in November 2020. This master plan promotes growth and investment within the sector to ensure that there is increased production in forestry areas and creation of jobs. I must also indicate, Chairperson, that most of the communities that are benefiting out of this implementation of the master plan are the very same small-scale growers, as we are in the process of transferring the plantation BNC into the communities. The master plan has already realized a significant investment from the private sector and employment creation. As we are in the second year of implementation, the partners will focus on addressing barriers to implementation so that implementation can be accelerated. All key role players and stakeholders strive to implement this plan successfully, as it will be a good example of how private sector and government can leverage each other, strengthen for the development of the sector. In an effort to scale up the plantation of the implementation of the master plan in the skills development front, the department intends to establish formal relations with institutions of higher learning, and there is already a planned engagement with Fort Cox Agriculture and Forestry Training Institute in the Eastern Cape to take place late in June this year. As part of the presidential tree planting initiatives of planting 10 million trees in 5 years, the department, in collaboration with other stakeholders, have already planted 762,000 trees in year one of this initiative. The department intends to plant 120,000 trees across all 9 provinces in this current financial year 2022-23. This will be supported by the collaboration with stakeholders in achieving the 2 million trees targets. As I conclude, Chair, I would like to thank the Honourable Minister for her leadership within the forestry, fisheries and environment sectors in the past year, and to thank the Director General, Ms. Nomfundo Chabalala, and the department for their support. Thank you very much, Team Environment and the NTTCO. Thank you, Zimbokodo. I thank the Honourable Chairperson, Ms. Mutambi, and members of the Portfolio Committee, in particular, for their robust engagement and guidance. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honourable Deputy Minister. Honourable Mchunu.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Humble greetings to you, Chairperson, and greetings to the Minister, the Deputy Minister, the members of the House, fellow South Africans. Honourable Chairperson, this vote 32 for the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment plays a critical role in the growth and the development of South African economy. The responsibility of helping to grow and develop our economy is the responsibility of every South African. It is important to note that despite our country's progressive environmental laws, there are still challenges faced by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. Please note that these are challenges, not failures. The National Environment Management Act, NEMA 107 of 1998, provides for the establishment of principles for decision-making on matters affecting the environment through cooperative environmental governance and procedures. Under Section 33 of NEMA, any person may institute a private prosecution against a person if such person has breached or threatens to breach a legal duty that is concerned with the protection of the environment and where the breach of that duty is an offense. Honorable Chairperson, one of the challenges facing our communities is a lack of compliance with our environmental laws. The lack of legislative compliance by environmental stakeholders has serious implications for the economy. Our environment ecosystems play a crucial role in the development of our economy by supporting revenues, future development opportunities, livelihoods, and sustainable harvest in forestry and the fisheries sector, including the support for the tourism sector, which contributes significantly to the GDP of our country. We have noticed that there is an increase in the level of sophistication in transnational organized environmental crime, which undermines good governance and developmental goals with the environmental sector. These transnational organized environmental crimes include the illegal logging, poaching, and trafficking of wildlife, illegal fisheries, mining and dumping of toxic waste, lion bone trading and rhino horn poaching, water pollution, and harvesting of protected plants and species, air pollution, and illegal waste dumping at local government level. Program 2 of the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and Environment deals with the regulatory compliance and sector monitoring. And the purpose is to promote the development of an enabling legal regime and licensing authorization system that will promote enforcement and compliance and ensure the coordination of sector performance. In order to ensure that there is compliance with our environmental laws within the fisheries sector, the DFFE will conduct over the medium term a total number of 16,500 enforcement and compliance inspections within the fishery sector. The fisheries sector is regulated through NIMA and NIMBA. Budget allocation to regulatory compliance and sector monitoring is 223 million, and this allocation increases by 0.8% over the medium term, which is good, Honorable Chair, and an indication that the department is focusing on this particular challenge. Environmental programs received the biggest allocation of the budget vote at 3,748 million rands and over 10 billion rands over the medium term. We support this budget vote because it will create about 210,080 much needed job opportunities through the expanded public works program and inclusive full-time job equivalent. The total number is 314,439. One of the areas that need our special attention is around waste management program. Most landfill sites are under municipalities and they are provincial competencies. It has been reported that close to 100 million tons of municipal, commercial, and industrial waste going to landfill sites is not productively recycled. As the ANC, we would like to see the support of small emerging waste recycling businesses to encourage this recycling of metal, plastic, rubber, and paper in order to significantly reduce energy consumption in the processing of metals and fabrication. Waste recycling represents not only an opportunity to keep our cities and towns clean, but to create many job opportunities for much unemployed youth, which is one of the priorities of our government. And in conclusion, Honorable Chairperson, I stand on behalf of the ANC and support this vote 32 for the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mchunu. Honorable Sheikh Imam.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, I've heard not a while ago that our honorable members were speaking about a more inclusive economy, inclusive economic growth. Now, let me advise the South. First of all, the forestry industry is still in the hands of a few. The fishing industry, right, alluded to by my colleague from the EFF, Honorable Paulson, is still in the hands of a few. So we cannot talk about inclusive economic growth in a country that is one of the most unequal societies in the world. Let me talk particularly about the fishing industry and what the small-scale fishing community go through, particularly those in the Lamberts Bay area, Hout Bay, and many other of these fishing seaside resorts that we have. They are at the mercy of organizations like INJ, Sea Harvest, and Ocean and things. More importantly, Chairperson, if you've noticed, and having had many discussions with these small-scale fishers, particularly those that live off the snook alone, they tell you that what the large vessels are doing are actually driving the snook away from the shore so that they are not able to get their trawlers anywhere near that. And that is also having a devastating effect on them. So if we want to talk about economic growth, we need to address the challenges, particularly And yes, Minister, I know some work has been done there. It would be hypocritical of me not to admit that. However, a lot more work needs to be done. Let's talk about the issue of the environment. I have repeatedly raised the concern of the community of Merebank, Lamontville, Wentworth, and all those areas, and the high levels of pollution. We talk about global warming. Is that not the reason why that particular communities were affected so badly with the flooding that took place? What are we doing about it? I'm yet to see that report that was undertaken by the University of KwaZulu-Natal addressing the challenges that the people face, particularly with tuberculosis, lung cancer, and things as a result of that. I see, Chairperson, you are reminding me that it is my time. Thank you very much. The National Freedom Party.
One more minute.
Thank you very much for that. Then if you have a minute, I can go on. Yeah. So I was talking particularly about the issue of that particular community. And let me tell you, the levels of tuberculosis, asthma, and others is very high in that particular area. And I think that matter needs to be addressed. Our concern, of course, is the AG's report, particularly on irregular expenditure in terms of the department. But I have the assurance in terms of the report that the committee is looking into it and that they are addressing it. However, you know, I think the weakness we have, Chairperson, is the fact that there is a provision to regularize irregular expenditure. And that is the reason why this is actually exploited. The National Freedom Party will support the report tabled here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Sheikh Imam. Honorable Modise.
House Chairperson, thank you very much. Greetings to yourself, greetings to the Minister, greetings to the Deputy Minister, greetings to the Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee and fellow South Africans. The African National Congress believes that all South Africans at the present and in future have the right to a safe and healthy environment that is enshrined in Section 24 of the South African Constitution. The Constitution mandates this Parliament to take reasonable legislative and other measures to prevent pollution, ecological degradation, promote conservation, and to secure ecological sustainable development and the use of natural resources while promoting justifiable economic and social development. I would like to put an emphasis on the promotion of the development and the use of natural resources in social and economic development. This becomes extremely important given the triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment those that faces our people on a daily basis. These triple challenges are the creation of a colonialism and apartheid as perpetuated by their horrible legacy. In seeking to eradicate this horrible legacy of colonialism and apartheid, Honorable Chairperson, the ANC speaks of, amongst others, affirmative action program in pursuit of a viable economic development that ensures that all South Africans have access to natural resources required to satisfy their basic needs and to restore traditional access to natural resources. It has been argued in the report of the World Commission on Environment and Development that sustainable development requires meeting the basic needs of all and extending to all opportunity to fulfill their aspirations for a better life. Sustainable development, Honorable Chair, in the language of the United Nations, is development that meets and needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. The purpose of this budget vote 32, is to lead South Africa's environmental, forestry, and fishery sectors to achieve sustainable development towards a better life for all. In 2021, His Excellency President Ramaphosa, during his SONA, said to the nation that climate change threatens our environmental health, socio-economic development, and economic growth. The ANC remains committed to the Paris Agreement and to the net zero carbon emission by the year 2050, and this vote 32 will continue to support equitable transition to a low carbon economy. Honorable Chairperson, through this vote 32, the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment will commit to the implementation of the approved low emissions development and growth strategy of the medium term and will receive allocation of 1.4 billion to deal with climate change, air quality, and sustainable development. Given the devastating impact of climate change effects, as the ANC will exercise oversight on the work of government on climate change, coordinated through the Presidential Coordinating Commission on Climate Change, tasked with the development of policies on just transition for the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. The Presidential Coordinating Commission on Climate Change was announced by President Ramaphosa during his address to the nation in 2021 in order to enhance government systems and capacity by ensuring that climate change is effectively addressed and mainstreamed in every department as an essential component of a broader national development strategy. Quite contrary to the claims made by others, the establishment of the PCCC undermines the work of the ministries. In fact, the establishment of PCCC was recommended by the National Planning Commission, said this should be done under the supervision of the presidency in order to ensure the mainstreaming of climate change in every department. The National Development Plan has noted that apart from the needs of improved disaster risk reduction, South Africa's National Climate Change Response White Paper highlights a suite of sectors that needs to consider climate change impacts in their planning, namely water, agriculture, and commercial forestry, health, biodiversity, and ecosystems and human settlement in both rural, urban, and coastal areas. In light of the deeply devastating impact of the recent floods in both KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape, which had resulted in the loss of over 400 lives, it is important that in dealing with climate change challenges, government should develop educational awareness programs around sustainable development goals, also known as the SDGs, especially in the rural communities. Honorable Chairperson, the ANC supports budget voted to of the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment under the stewardship of Honorable Barbara Creecy, Minister. This is not in any way whatsoever misguided, but it is based on a clear conviction that this vote has made reasonable allocation of limited resources towards the achievement of the medium-term strategic framework on priority number 4, which is the spatial integration, human settlement, and local government. So the less said by those who are opposed to this budget, the better. Chairperson, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Modise. Honorable Minister, before you respond, you have an additional 3 minutes, which you saved when you did your opening address. Thank you, Honorable Minister. The opportunity is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Acting House Chair. And allow me to start off by thanking all the honourable members for the quality contributions to our debate today. I think where I'd like to start, House Chair, is with the question of the financial status of our entities. And I think that it would be important for us all to acknowledge that despite the difficulties of the COVID pandemic and the devastating impact that this pandemic had on tourism and the consequent revenues that all 4 of our entities are dependent on, including the Weather Service, which gets its revenues from air traffic. I think that what is really significant is none of these entities have had to approach National Treasury for bailouts. And in this financial year, none of these entities are tabling deficit budgets. That doesn't mean that it hasn't been tough. And I think that honourable members are fully aware in 2020, we had to make departmental transfers to these entities. In 2021, we had to support applications by these entities to go to National Treasury and request that infrastructure budgets be used for operations. And in this financial year, although we are expecting to see greater revenue stability, we are still having to support all the entities through a range of different programs, including, as you've heard, the work we are doing with SAWS to sort out the weather monitoring stations, to make sure that they're not vandalized, to relocate them into schools and police stations, but also to upgrade their forecasting capacity with modern radar technology so that we are able to undertake the micro climatic forecasting, which would be expected of any modern weather forecasting service. With regard to fishing, I don't want at this stage to defend the FRAP process because we are in the appeals phase. And I think that it's very important that those who have been disappointed and those who disagree with the allocations are given a proper opportunity to raise all the issues that they would want to raise in the appeal process. I do, however, want to say to honourable members that this sector is not without its complexity, given the fact that there are more than 28,000 formal jobs in the commercial fishing sector. And one in the current climate also has to look at that particular issue. With regard to the small-scale sector, I absolutely agree with the honourable members who say that it's taken too long to sort out the fishing allocation rights in the Western Cape. And this year it has to be concluded. But I do think that it's important to acknowledge the 10,000 members of small-scale cooperatives that we have already established. The key areas of focus going forward is, first of all, to improve the basket of species. And one of the issues that we will come back to when we conclude the FRAP process is exactly what is being transferred in terms of species from the commercial sector to the small-scale sector. What we also want to examine together with the small-scale sector, and we are hosting a workshop on this, is this concept of co-management. Because what we understand is if we don't set up systems of co-management around particularly high-value species like abalone and West Coast rock lobster, we're not going to be able to sort out the poaching problem. Let me just say that with regard to the very vexed issue of rhino poaching, I think that it's militarization of the problem is only successful up to a point. But we have to solve two other problems in order to find a sustainable solution. The one problem is the issue of sustainable beneficiation of communities who live around our protected areas. And I think that this is why we are so worried about proper settlement of land claims. And it's why we want to ensure that in the commercialization strategy of both Isimangaliso and Sandparks, that there will be proper beneficiation for local communities. Because this is the only sustainable way of ensuring that young men in particular are not lured in as the foot soldiers of these poaching syndicates. With regard to demand management, it's a complex and difficult issue. There have definitely been programs in this regard in the past. I don't know how successful they would have been. The major markets are China and Vietnam. I think what we have managed to do in recent times is to improve our enforcement cooperation with both of those countries. And this year and last year, there have been significant successes in terms of intercepting corn as a result of cooperation with the enforcement agencies in both of these countries. And I think that this is an important area where we would want to have greater focus going forward. On the issue of plastic waste, honourable members, I agree with you. It's a huge issue in our country. And I know that you've had a very interesting study tour to Kenya, and I'm sure in due course, we might well have an opportunity to have a parliamentary colloquium on this issue so that we can all interrogate what is going on in our own country and how it compares with good practice elsewhere. But I do want to say to honourable members that there's no shortcut for dealing with improving waste management in municipalities. In the recent visit I paid to KZN, where I was assisting my colleague with the cleanup of the beaches, the major problem there was the plastic waste that had washed into the river systems and into the oceans and ultimately onto the beaches. And while the organic matter can be dealt with through normal ecological processes, this plastic waste has to be collected by hand, and it was truly frightening to see the quantity that it washed down. And I do agree with honourable members that this problem has got to be put back on the drawing board, and we've got to have a lot more attention to it. Let me say that it's very heartening to me to see that we have cross-party support for robust action around the climate crisis. And of course, I'm very much looking forward to your processing the climate bill with speed. I'm glad that we're all agreed that as we deal with issues of biodiversity and conservation, we have to also deal with issues of community beneficiation, because as Honourable Singh pointed out, we can't have a situation where ambitious international targets for biodiversity and conservation and reforestation happen at the expense of local communities and their access to land and other rural resources. Let me say also in this regard that the issue raised by Honourable Ganshaw of exclusion of traditional fishing communities from some of the marine protected areas is a matter that we have set up a task team to consider, and I hope in due course we will be resolving that matter in a mutually satisfactory manner. Honourable members, I think that we can only restate our commitment to continuing with the very hard work of dealing with irregular expenditure and the necessary consequence management so that we can improve the probity of our department and of our budget. I think that we all appreciate the fact that we have got significant scientists and other professionals who give very good work on the environment. What we've got to fix is the financial management of the system. That too, I have learned, does not have quick fixes, but we remain, all of us, committed to ensuring that there are better outcomes there in the future. With that, let me conclude with the words of Honourable Breert, when she said that these matters of pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change are fundamental for the well-being of humanity going forward. There is indeed no planet B for any of us. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. Honourable members, that brings us to the end of the business of today. The House is now adjourned. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Modise. Thank